Hi, my name is Kristen Cox, and I'm the owner of Checkpoint Services, which is a Texas-based small business that I started in my garage in 1995, and we've been in business 21 years. It is a technology company, woman-owned, and we employ people across the state, and we do business all across the state. But today, I'd like to talk to you about a legislative issue. With the legislative session coming up soon, I was hoping that some of you might join in with me in advocating for an issue that impacts my business and hopefully yours as well if you do business with the state government. And so I just want to give you some background on the Prompt Payment Act and some suggested legislative advocacy tips if you are one to talk to your legislator or if you're willing to talk to your legislator about this issue. So a little history on the Prompt Payment Act. It was started in 1999. I'm not really sure what prompted it because before the Prompt Payment Act, my company was getting paid on time regularly, but somebody must not have. And they started this act, and it's actually slowed down the payments for my company since it's been in existence. But it basically calls for payment to be due within 30 days of the latter of receipt of goods, completion of services, and receipt of the invoice. So net 30 for the state of Texas is different than net 30 for our industry. And if your company's like mine, net 30 for me and most of the world is 30 days from the day something leaves the dock and ships. Unless you're talking about services, then it's 30 days from when they're complete. So the Prompt Payment Act calls for automatic interest penalty if something is not paid within 30 days. The vendor doesn't have to do anything. They don't have to modify their invoice or add it. The agency has to add the penalty. Now, how many of you have actually received a prompt payment penalty? Raise your hand. I maybe twice in over 20 years. But how many of you receive late payments even beyond this definition all the time? Yes. So I'm here to ask you to help me advocate for reforming the Prompt Payment Act. And the other thing is, it was designed to protect small businesses, but really does it? Even if it works as designed, we owe our payment with industry standard net 30, and the state agencies don't pay us till probably a week later if something ships and takes a week to get there and get documented in their system. So I'm not sure that really helps small businesses, and it certainly doesn't help us with large orders because we've got that out-of-pocket expense. So for my company, and probably for yours too, you rarely receive that prompt payment. But here's some other issues with it. Many state agencies' POs do not include an email address for accounts payable. So you might use the email address that you already have on file, or you might have to call around and ask for one, or you might mail your invoice, which gives you no audit trail that it was sent. There's also no clear definition of receipt of invoice. Is that when the accounts payable person got back from vacation and entered it into the system? Is that when it was received in the mailroom before it was taken up and delivered to accounts payable? When was the invoice received? There's no clear definition on receipt of goods. Oftentimes we send something to a warehouse, but is it when it arrives, when we can track it from our carrier? Or is it when the warehouse personnel receive it? Or in some instances, they forward it on to the end user. And is it when the end user receives it? I've had all of those definitions. In fact, I had one agency tell me it's when the end user not only receives it, but when they pack it and they accept it, which it may sit in their warehouse or in their office for a week, 2-3 weeks before they unpack it and accept it, and that's when they consider it received. The agency also considers something paid right when they send the payment. And we all know mail time. How many of your credit card companies would accept without a late fee if you said, well, I sent it by the due date? So that's not really realistic either. There's also no policies for how to handle typical issues such as damaged goods, short shipment, things like that. So the agency's left to decide with their own policies or make it up what they're going to do in those situations. And none of these are just really industry standard. So I'll just give you a few examples of some things that I have seen or experienced or heard from in my hub advocacy and in my small business advocacy. For example, one thing is you wait till an invoice is past due by a few days, so you give it time to have received the goods and the invoice in 30 days past, and you call and you say, haven't received your payment. And they say, I never received the invoice. So you resend the invoice. Well, guess what? That's day one, and they get 30 days to pay it. And that's by the Prompt Payment Act, the day they receive the invoice. Yes, that has happened. Another example, this happened to us recently on a $310,000 invoice. 2 items were not received, and the agency held the entire payment. Didn't notify us till it was past due, and then said, well, we're missing 2 items. So then they later discovered the items were received when we provided tracking and proof of delivery, but when they sent the payment, they didn't include the prompt payment because by their records, the items had not been received in their system. So that once they received them in their system, they weren't late by their records. Here's another one I've heard of, items being shipped to a school district and they go to the warehouse, and then the warehouse has to distribute them to individual schools whose clerk, who's also doing attendance and all kinds of other tasks, has to remember to do the receiving in the system, and that's not his or her main job, and that might be delayed for a week, a month, 2 months until the invoice is late and you go calling for it. Another one that we've experienced and we've heard of, an invoice is mailed to the contact you've always used, and then when you call and it's late and they say, oh, well, that person's gone or no longer doing accounts payable, here's the new one, you email it to the new person, well, guess what? You're on day one again. So you see a pattern here. Another one, an agency finds an issue with an invoice, and so they don't pay, they don't contact the vendor. The vendor can't address an issue if they don't know about it, and oftentimes the vendor doesn't call until the payment is late. So these are all things that I've heard of or experienced in my years, and probably you have too if you're watching this. So some of the things that I would like you to advocate for, and just take a few notes if any of these hit home with you or if you feel led to advocate for the same things. First of all, if you don't know who represents you, be sure and look that up. You can Google who represents me, state of Texas, or it's the website is like fyi.legis, standing for legislator.state.tx.us, and you can put in your zip code or your address, but hopefully you've met your representatives, your senators and your state representatives, and they know you by name and they know your business. That's so much easier to walk into their office in Austin or in your hometown if they know you, and hopefully you know their aides who take care of small business issues. So here's some suggestions that I have. One suggestion, this is kind of radical, but I think it's worth pursuing, is require Net 15 for hub or small businesses. Many states have this, and the federal government has this, where small businesses get paid sooner. Probably will result in getting paid Net 20 or 25 anyway, but that would be a great change for the state of Texas for small businesses to require a Net 15, and it's not unprecedented. The other thing is to require a state purchase order to include an email address for accounts payable. Very, very important. When you email the invoice, you have an audit trail that you sent it. So that's important. Another one would be require day one to be the day the invoice is received in the email box, even if the employee is out. So if the employee's on vacation and they don't handle it that day, they need to backdate it to the day that it was in their email box, if it was emailed. Require day one for the receipt of goods to be the first signature when the goods were delivered. So that very first entry at the warehouse. If the warehouse doesn't log it in for a day or two, they need to backdate it. If the warehouse forwards it to the end user, the date received needs to go back to the day it was received at the warehouse. Here's another one. Require accounts payable notify a vendor within 3 days if there's an error on the invoice that would delay the payment. Very important that the vendors know about it and they have a chance to address it. Another one, require that the agency notify the vendors within 1 day if an order is damaged or if it's short based on what the receiving notice is. This is so important. If orders are lost in transit or if the agency hasn't properly recorded them, the vendor needs to know right away to address the issue. If an order is short, it's not complete, or it's damaged and the agency accepted it and did not refuse it, require a short payment. Don't withhold a $310,000 invoice because 2 items weren't received. That is unreasonable and it's harmful. It puts small businesses at financial risk. So require a short payment if there's an issue such as that. And the other one is have a website and a contact for the Prompt Payment Act at the state level where vendors can submit claims. If a vendor believes they're owed a prompt payment penalty, it's really hard to convince your customer that they owe you a prompt payment penalty. Plus, for the relationship, it's kind of difficult. If there was a website where you could upload, here's my invoice when it was sent, here's the tracking for the goods when they were received, here's when I received my payment, and it could be handled at the state level, that would be ideal. So if some of these issues resonate with you, if you have a small business and some of them hit home with you, if you would be willing to contact your legislator before the session starts, beginning of next year, I think all small businesses in Texas would benefit from it, and I think business would be even better in the state of Texas. Thank you for listening, and good luck with your business.